G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic weekend. And good news from the Willie residents, my washing machine broke months ago, so I've been going to friends' houses and Lily's parents' house and everything, but my replacement is here and I've got everything washing. It's on. Anyway, we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to have a look, of course, at Ukrainian strikes down in Crimea and what damage has been caused there. Of course, we need to talk about the Slovakian leader, Robert Fico, who has been shot multiple times. We will look at what's happening up in the north. We'll talk about the US and Ukraine and aid, as well as strikes potentially in Russia. And of course, then we'll have a look at the maps. Now, it is Thursday the 16th here in Australia, and I'll just double check and refresh now. No, as per usual, the deep state map doesn't update on a Thursday. So I'll double check before this goes, I guess, up. And I may cut in a bit, but otherwise we'll be going off Surak maps and Noel reports maps today. So first off, let's have a look at the maps and show you around where we're looking. So of course, here we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14, and the green here, areas of which Russia has been at some point and has either withdrawn or has been pushed out by Ukrainian offensives. Now, where we'll talk about first is down here in then Crimea. Now, this will be a massive proponent of the war. It has been since 2014. It will be more and more into the future, as down in here will be the crux of so much coming in the future. Not only future attacks, but diplomatic actions, eventually peace deals, negotiations, all of this at some point, regardless of where the fighting ends. Anyway, let's have a look over some strikes down here. Now, it's not 1,000% clear what exactly has happened. As we know right now, there's another strike going on. So, of course, it's midday here in Australia. So it's nighttime or early morning in Ukraine. And we have alerts that there could be naval drones going against targets in Crimea as well as other ATACMS strikes. But until we know, then we don't know. So last night, though, we saw this. So this is footage from the Belbek airfield. We're looking onto the Belbek airfield of major fires out here, said to be from ATACMS munitions. Now, fighter bomber has said this missile attack at Belbek, presumably ATACMS. That's what we would think it is. And talking of ATACMS, as we see with a lot of weapon systems going into Ukraine, especially GPS systems, such as the Excalibur artillery rounds, there's this sharp fall of success about 6 or 8 weeks after entering the battle space, as Russia reprograms its defenses and other bits of warfare equipment to then counter that. So you have that sharp fall off. So I believe in the next coming weeks, we will see massive amounts of ATACMS being fired in before then Russia's counter for that does improve. But these are having a lot of success down here. So what we're seeing here is a very important air defense system. Now, this is said to be a 9-2 November 6 Echo radar that, of course, works with an S-400, can work with S-300, I believe, as well, destroyed down at the airfield. Now, these are the only photographs we actually have so far of this then, of course, destroyed here. Of course, very expensive, very important systems. Any air defense is. And we've seen multiple of those systems then heavily damaged or destroyed down in Crimea recently as well. And this points towards, will we see more actions here? We know Ukraine, from people online through to officials, everything, talk more and more about the Kerch Strait bridge down here, of course, connecting Russia to Ukraine. But the strategic importance of this has probably reduced significantly over the past 2 years, and it still will be very difficult to hit. Regardless, I believe we will see more attempts on that. Now, this is not from fighter bomber, although people are saying it is. I've double-checked and it's not, but it's said to be from still Russian sources talking about down here. Bad news from Sevastopol. So we're talking down in Crimea still. We lost planes, air defense systems, and military personnel. As a result of shelling in Sevastopol by ATACMS missiles, we unfortunately suffered serious losses. The enemy hit planes at Belbek airfield. 1 MiG-31 was lost and completely destroyed, and 3 Su-27s were damaged. They were hit by submunitions from missiles. And we have seen Russian accounts posting photographs of submunitions on the ground, as well as warnings for people, civilians in the area, to be very careful of submunitions. Submunitions are incredibly unstable on the ground. We see this throughout Ukraine as well. Submunitions then acting as basically a mine on the ground if it hasn't gone off. And the amount of submunitions that actually fail is very high, considering you can have hundreds in each missile, depending on the type. But we are finding out whether it's possible to repair them. These are Su-27s. We lost 2 air defense launchers, S-300 and 400, and a radar. Now, the radar is far more important than the launchers, and the S-400, therefore, far more important than S-300 as well. Unfortunately, 11 soldiers were killed. So we know a radar and launcher has definitely been taken out. As far as the aircraft, again, we haven't seen any photographs of that, and photographs of things like this, footage, drone footage, satellite imagery, does come out within 24, 48 hours. So I know everyone will be making large claims, but just hold your horses. Yes, we may be behind, but at least we know when we do report it that it will be, to the best of our ability, what is said to be correct. Now, massive news came time last night that the leader of Slovakia, Robert Fico, was shot multiple times. Now, he's reportedly out of surgery and conscious and no longer is in a critical condition. Now, the shooter was a 71-year-old man who opened fire outside a cultural community centre in Hadlova in Slovakia. So it is said to be politically motivated, but yet we don't know. What I want to talk about here is how the information propaganda war space, which is a Venn diagram that goes over itself, and that includes mainstream, that includes independents, it includes officials, it includes bloody grandma down the street as well, and how this will have effect on this, even if it had nothing to do with this. So Viktor Orban here, who we know himself and the Slovakian leader, they get lumped in the same category of these pro-Russian bot being put in by Putin, all of this. Now, his post came out straight after the shooting, as I was deeply shocked by the heinous attack against my friend, Prime Minister Robert Fico. We pray for his health and quick recovery. God bless him and his country. And Zelensky has said similar as well. Now, this was on the Telegram, but I just want to break this down further. Now, who is Prime Minister Robert Fico? How can it relate to this conflict? And like I say, regardless of the motive or not, this will be used in the informational space. Everything is pushed out to push something around, and I think more is connected than people probably want to believe too. But he's the leader of Slovakia since 2023. Now, he ran on what people will say a pro-Russian candidate. That was what he was saying. Now, regardless of whether he was one way or the other, Slovakia is a democratic NATO and EU member, and he won the popular election. So he obviously appealed to the majority of people there. Now, similarly to Hungarian leader Viktor Orban, he has been labelled as pro-Russian, Putin sympathiser, or a Russian plant, Putin plant. Now, again, to be labelled as this is very, very slim. I haven't seen him waving around flags and funding money over there or whatever, but there has been, him and, of course, Orban supporting that there should be negotiations, should be peace talks, and stopping or questioning aid. Stopping aid from maybe their country, but also questioning aid from other EU NATO members, and has actually maintained relations into Russia as well. Although we have seen Fico did not go against Ukraine's EU membership bids, where they do hold power to definitely uproot a lot of that. So this will, of course, be used in many circles, and a lot of the pro-Ukrainian crowd are celebrating this and saying that it was Russia. The pro-Russian crowd are then pointing that it was some CIA, Ukraine, Mossad operation. Now, so far, there's no evidence of either of these, so hold your horses. But of course, regardless, it's going to be used in that way. Now, I've probably missed a lot in this, but regardless, leaders of countries democratically elected NATO EU. This is a huge thing. And I hope that we don't stumble and trip our way into something far more serious due to this. G'day legends, I know I look different. As you might have heard in that last clip, my microphone was going a bit rogue. These cables are the most useless thing I've ever had in my life. So we're back to casual Willie. I'm going to redo this part. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the maps and we're going to talk about what is happening up in the north between Kharkiv and Belgorod. Now, still, personally, I believe that this is still a reconnaissance element. Now, this map hasn't updated for today, but I haven't seen much that suggests that this is a full-on offensive. Everyone's piled in. If we're hearing from 30 to 80,000 Russian troops were built up in here, we haven't seen anywhere near that. All the assets cross here. We've seen a few vehicles hit. We've seen a few soldiers. We've seen in the tens taken POW as well as killed, and some vehicles, some tanks, but nowhere near the amount we would see here. Now, this to me means we'll see a decision made on this area. And I think it's just as likely that we'll see a full commitment and push down here as it could be that we see then a complete withdrawal if this isn't seen as working, pulling Ukrainian troops away, or an opportune push down to the south. We could just see in a day a complete withdrawal from there. And of course, you know how the informational space will then report on that. And we'll talk about maneuver and attritional warfare in directions like this near the end of this video. Now, let's have a look at this. Now, I was sent this across from a dear friend of mine. I won't say anymore. But, mate, I have a few friends working around Kharkiv at the moment, and is worse than Bakhmut. Russia is gaining ground very fast. Won't be long before Kupiansk, Sumy roll through as well. Now, what he's talking about here, we'll talk about Sumy first. So, of course, Kursk borders Belgorod and Sumy. This is the Ukraine-Russian border sitting through here. Everyone from officials, bloggers, Budanov has said that there may be a Russian opening in Sumy to further try and thin out Ukrainian forces as well. Now, up in the north, the two big areas which are massive central hubs, of course, there's Kharkiv, but there's also Kupiansk. And my friend's saying that there may be a push on Kupiansk. We've seen Russia try here a lot with areas such as Sinkivka and Kislivka down here as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if we do see this opening in Sumy. Many are suggesting that is maybe what we'll see. But we have a lot of geolocated footage to look at to line up where the map should be sitting, and we'll look at the Syriac maps. As I mentioned, this one now hasn't updated, and we'll look at problems with the defensive lines here too. Let's start at the defensive works. I think this is incredibly important not to just hash over, regardless of how you feel about this. This is something that is a massive, massive stuff up here and has allowed this push in and the loss of a lot of territory. Now, this is from Deep State. Continuation of yesterday's topic about IFS. Many accept the thesis about the commission and the search for the guilty with skepticism. And we'll probably agree, because instead of finding the culprits, everything is blamed on discrediting and hostile IPSO, this informational psychological special operation. So everyone's saying, no, this is some sort of psyops, rather than people are responsible for this mistake that has happened down here. Talking about these fortifications, some of which 10 Ks from the border, 15 Ks from the next Russian fortifications not being built up, or their poor preparation and incompetent approach. We've heard of Ukrainian soldiers saying that some of them are just in the complete wrong spot, and that these here, yes, they've been built up and barricaded, but people suggesting these aren't in the spot of where they would need to be, or completed, or actually manned. Now, here we go. Such as a negligent approach to the work process played an evil joke in the Osheretny district. Now, only due to the fact our fighters had to withdraw from their positions. Now, this is what we're talking about down in Avdiivka. And of course, we have Avdiivka sitting here, Osheretny, and of course, we know that Avdiivka frontline here held for a long time and then had a massive withdrawal back to areas like Lastacheny, Stepovy, and then a further withdrawal to Osheretny. And more questions came out about, moving back to better positions that were built up, and then movement back, and more questions about what was actually built up in here. And there was a hell of a lot of time to build this up, and then it wasn't done. And they suggest that in here as well, from 23 to 24, they were able to carry out the first stage of construction there. So again, massive problems there. And we have seen, of course, Russia has built huge fortifications in the south of Ukraine and in the south of Russia down here as well that far exceed from what we're looking at, Ukraine has been able to build in these directions. Now, look at Vovchansk. Here is the Russian 2 layers of defensive works before Shebkino in here. Then we look at Vovchansk. Very, very little, if anything, before it. Some maps do show some before it, but fairly deep well back in here. Then this is the other area of which we're then talking about. This is the Holoboki front in here. Now, of course, what we're seeing, if we line up somewhere where the rough outline would be, many positions now are in occupied territory. And beyond that, there's not that much. So you can't just say that it was some sort of information campaign and to call this out is somehow pro-Russian. We need to look at what has actually occurred here. And even Deep State now is calling that out. So let's stuff it. Let's look on the Vovchansk front straight off the bat first. Now, what we have seen here, what is a big change, is we have seen tanks arriving in Vovchansk. Now, still not that many, but we do have reports of it and footage that here Russian tanks have entered the northern part of Vovchansk and are shooting inside the city. National police officer, this bloke as well, said that on their national television. Now, we do have then this video. This is a destroyed Russian tank here, then on fire, and take this clip here. Then this has been geolocated by EJ Shahid, I believe, of where exactly this is. Then further put on this check dot point here. We see this is where, zoom a little bit, see this borderline runs upon Vovchansk. It's sitting right about here. So right on the edge of where this red zone is. And we believe that those tanks have now crossed into Vovchansk itself. Well, that is right on the outskirts. So suggesting a break-in, meaning the situation here has deteriorated a lot if heavy armor has then arrived in this location. Now, we have then this bloke from the National Police here as well, I believe, speaking from inside Vovchansk.
Для підтвердження дати я сьогодні зранку виступав в прямому ефірі телемарафону. Ми знаходимося, евакуюємо людей, всім допомагаємо. Ситуація в Вовчанську вкрай
The situation in Vovchansk is extremely difficult, and you'll hear a lot of small arms fire in the background too.
Ворог займає позиції на
Enemy occupies positions on the local streets of Vovchansk. So please evacuate, asking for people to evacuate from here. So there we go. So let's have a look at exactly where it was then geolocated of where he was. So Vovchansk itself is sort of split by this Vovcha river down here. So we can see that he is right down around here. Now, what people are saying is, well, the majority of this northern part and some of the eastern has then been occupied by Russia. That's where they are then fighting through. So let's have a look then at the Syriac map and compare these. Now, of course, on the western side of here, it just looks significantly different. We don't know what's happening there. But let's have a look at the center of Vovchansk. So showing far more fighting right down halfway into the center down here. No crossing yet of this river, but also a fight from the east pushing west, coming across, then enveloping this part of the city here. And a lot of street by street fighting continuing here. Now, these maps, these don't line up at all. Potentially we'll see this map catch up tomorrow, but again, we know this Deep State map has been a fair way behind in the past few weeks. Now let's look at what then Syriac says specifically about his map here. So from this axis, Russian forces continue advancing inside Vovchansk, taking control over a series of positions. So inside here, on these streets, while troops advance along the Vovcha River and managed to enter the first houses from the east. So we had that geolocated footage down in here yesterday. So we know Russia is here somewhere and then pushing through on the city there. So the situation, it is definitely developing, seeing what is then occurring on that front. Now, let's push to then the western side, this Holoboki front in here, and have a look at some footage, some geolocations as well. So we have this bit of footage here. This is unbelievable footage. These are Ukrainian soldiers here. I believe from looking at things like cans on weapons, so suppressors, high-cut helmets, multicams, and the drills, these are probably some level of special forces element compared to a lot of the other guys that we then see. So, better kit, better drills can point towards that. We see then an assault on this building. We know Russians are occupying this building. Currently, we see a push back here to get some gap between themselves and the building here on this then advancement. These are good drills here, as well as good spacing and cordon from the guys in the behind here. Of course, it's very hard to know exactly the situation from zoomed in like this and not on the ground, but solid drills. And then we do see that they managed to get the Russians actually move out from this building and surrender to them, and then immediate first aid is given, tourniquets on, things like this. Of course, here's a tourniquet going on. This full video can be seen on my Telegram as well. And this is what we like to see, that once soldiers are non-combatants, they've surrendered, hands up, or injured, that by the convention laws put in place, laws of armed conflict, they are allowed to surrender and then given medical treatment as well. So that is good footage there all round, and good solid drills from what I can see in my limited experience. Now, this is where the geolocation is done. And if we chuck it onto the map, we see this is the blue dot down here. If we look on this map, we're talking right on this outside of these dashes here. Now, these dashes is part of this Lipsy, I believe, not part of Holoboki. So right on the outskirts of the grey zone. So the grey zone is definitely more than is being shown on this map, but we do know this map then is one day behind as this does expand control around here. Now, let's have a look then at some other maps. Here we have then the Noel reports. He shows this same movement here and this capturing of Holoboki, not too dissimilar from the deep state map. Then today, let's have a look at Syriac. And this is where we start seeing some changes, although not too dissimilar. This western side of these two pushes is far more similar than the eastern side. So we see this red dot, this is Holoboki. Now, right on here is right where that house was, and it's saying that there is a further southerly push here of grey zone. We don't know exactly when that footage was taken, but saying that they have broken down to the south of these dashes and controlling more area from here for the Russians. Again, we like when maps line up, but it's going to get further and further from that because the maps are pushing harder and harder on other. But the Kharkiv axis, which is this axis, so this is the Kharkiv axis that Syriac calls it. Russian army continue advancing northern dashes of Lipsy. So exactly where we saw then those elements deployed in here. Now, Zelensky has spoken about this situation that is developing in the north of the country. Over the course of the day, all of Ukraine's Defence Force units managed to partially stabilise the situation in the Kharkiv region. So partially. Everyone's quoting that they've managed to stabilise the situation and just putting stabilise in quotation marks, partially stabilised. We can clearly see that the occupiers are attempting to stretch our forces thin and make our combat work less concentrated. We react appropriately in every direction, and we must have the means to respond to the enemy. So what meaning here, the means is that asking for more equipment to come in, or equipment that has been promised. We have seen Zelensky recently talking a lot about there's been a lot of equipment promised that then has never arrived, or has then arrived very late. But this is what we do believe Russia is trying to do. I think there's a multifaceted approach here. Yes, to try and thin out Ukrainians' lines down in the south or the east and see their movement, but also check and see what Ukraine's response will be here. Do they mobilise more men? Do they send in reserves? Do they do nothing? How built up are the defensive works? And that will then come into what Russia's next step is. Depending on this reaction, they may then make this the axis, or that recon element may go, hey, boys, we're not coming through here. Let's withdraw and try and Sumy or somewhere else. So I think there is multiple outcomes still up in the air of what may actually happen here. Maybe Ukraine will say, let's just sacrifice this part of land. We'll fall back to, if there are built up defensive works here, we'll take this back at some point, but it's not worth pushing too many elements in here at the moment. So, you got to remember that big strategic plays are at work here by Russia and Ukraine. And we are in the phase of attritional warfare where both sides need to consider what attriting they are willing to actually have on their own forces. So that is the juice worth the squeeze. So let's actually have a look at the maps in some other fronts. So we'll come down to Avdiivka straight off then the bat in here. Of course, this is an older map, but this is what then Suryak says. Situation north and west of Avdiivka. During the last 32 hours, Ukrainian army retook the trenches west of Solovov. Meanwhile, Russian combing operations were taking place at Ulmansk following Ukrainian withdrawal. So, just to give you an idea on this map, this dot is Ulmansk. This dot then is Solovov here, just to give you an idea. So up in Solovov, that Ukraine managed to push back in and retake some trenches in this position. We saw a movement here over the past couple of days, so it is coming back and forward, and that Russia is clearing through the remaining areas then in Ulmansk down here. Now, what we do know is this map is behind because we had geolocated footage all the way up through here from about a week, pretty much bang on a week ago now. So we know that is in the wrong location on this map. Now, the area of which is just being ignored, and I believe potentially on purpose, is Robotny down here. Now, we did see that this map caught up and showed the Russian movement out from Verbove, recapturing then their own defensive line through here from 2023. But what we then see in here is no movement at all in Robotny, which is going against many, many other maps, including War Mapper, who is more on the pro-Ukrainian side, as well as then today, a Noel reports map here showing that a lot of the southern part of Robotny has come under Russian control. And of course, we'll look at the Suryak map as well, but that this bloke, who is the representative of the President of the Southern Defense Forces, has said the statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense about the occupation of Robotny in Zaporozhye region are not true. The position of our troops has not changed. The situation is under control. So saying that nothing here has changed, although many maps do disagree with this, especially Suryak. Now, Suryak is showing a large movement out through Robotny. If we zoom out one on this, we can see shrine line up where Novoporovka is, see where the defensive work is, and then Robotny itself. So see where this road turns just then to the northwest. That is right here. So showing significantly different here. Russian army took control of the eastern trenches of Robotny. Moreover, the front was levelled in this area following the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army northwards. Despite official declarations of the liberation of this locality, it is still necessary to take the northern trenches where Ukrainian troops still remain. So Russia is saying they've got it. Ukraine is saying nothing has changed in here. Now, that's no different to the informational war we see played every single day. But I believe we have this map showing that, Ukrainian maps, other maps showing there has been movement in here. So I believe there's been movement in here, and it'll be interesting to see. Now, I just want to talk about those defensive works for a second. Let's have a look at just the difference in some of these works. Where is my map? Maybe I then deleted it. Here we go. So we see this. We see the two lines of defense, this line a long way back in from Vovchansk up in the east. Now, we know that these lines down here were built in a much, much shorter time frame than Ukraine did have. So this green, this was cleared in September, November 2022. You've had the best part of 18 months. And what has been built up in here is this area, even compared to what Russia has built on the other side, both of which are under threat by FPV drones, artillery, everything. I understand that it's bloody a lot easier said than done, but it is interesting to see what has now come under control and what then hasn't, and just the scale of the works Russia has built compared to what Ukraine has built in areas that we believe were very, very likely to have an attack at some point. From Sumy to Kharkiv, and I believe this is incredibly concerning and raises a lot of questions for further back. How is this going to look if Russia continue an advancement? Now, before we talk about American weapons used inside Russia. I just want to talk about the front line and what we're seeing. Now, I spoke to a friend last night, senior officer, very knowledgeable. He's actually going to help me with some stuff about attritional warfare and the movement from then maneuver warfare. And he basically said, look, any large war, maneuver warfare ends and attritional warfare starts. And we've seen this war in the attritional warfare phase for a long time. Hence the massive buildup of works and the very limited amount of ground being taken. You're talking hundreds of meters or kilometers a day or months with zero changes. From the end of the last time we saw major moves was Ukraine in 2022, Kherson, Kharkiv. Since then, we've seen basically a net zero change. This is attritional warfare, mobilization. Now, something that has sped up and exacerbated this are drones, both your intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance drones and your kamikaze drones. That the ability to target maneuver elements, whether infantry or vehicles, has just gone through the roof. Not only target them, but see them, eliminate them, or at least cut off what they are trying to do. And this is the reason why we're not seeing better equipment make a massive change on the front line. So just go with me a second. That a Leopard 2A6 compared to a T62 is light years better tank. How much change have we seen the Leopard 2A6 make compared to the T62 on the front line? Not really that much when you compare the cost versus the training, all of this on it. Now, yes, that is a miles better vehicle, but how much change has it actually made? Well, a lot of those more modern tanks are being used as basically dug-in artillery pieces back from the front line. What we're seeing now is a dug-in grinding war and operations working inside their own bubble of influence. So let's say up here, these troops won't push, I believe, any more than 10 kilometers before artillery and electronic warfare assets then cross over here to stay within that bubble to not get cut off. And who wins in an attritional war? Well, once you start losing an attritional war, it is incredibly difficult to then turn the tide. But who ultimately wins in an attritional war is who can produce the most shells, the most soldiers, and who is willing to wear the most amount of hurt for the most amount of time. Not only the civilians, the soldiers, and the economy, and who can sacrifice for the longest amount of time, both ways you live and how many losses you're going to have. We are not going to see any major movements on this map without huge losses. How many people are you willing to sacrifice? And this is what I've said in this war. Before we see any objectives reached by either Russia or Ukraine, we're going to see over 1 million men killed. For Ukraine to push through these defensive works in an attritional war is going to be incredibly costly. Yes, longer range weapons will help and F-16s will help, but at the end of the day, going to have to move through dug-in positions and massive minefields, positions we know. Same as Russia making any movements east to west or north to south. We're in an attritional phase of war, and who is willing to take the most amount of hurt and most amount of sacrifice? That Russia and Ukraine both see this war as an existential threat and their own territory and the future of the nations too. So there's no end in sight, but in the immediate to going on future, it's going to just become this massive meat grinder of guys and who will hold out then the longest. That's the way I then see it. But what we do know is Ukraine so far has not been allowed to use the majority of Western weapons inside Russia. Now, we have seen some used across into Belgorod and some in other areas, but not on a huge amount. And we're going to talk at length then about this and what I was sent across, what Blinken has said and what Ukrainian officials have been asking for. Of course, we saw David Cameron from the UK suggest and say that their weapons could be used inside Russia. I will note, though, we haven't yet seen those used then either. So let's look at what I was sent across from my mate before we go over the US. Matt, my 2 cents on the strikes issue. If Storm Shadow's scalps, same thing, just UK and French, hit Russian territory, that would be the UK and French weapons programmed by officers of those countries hitting land everyone recognises as Russia. So everyone recognises that this is Russia, and we know that there are officers from those countries helping with those systems. So I don't think Russian strikes on UK France land would be out of the question. My guess is that British statements about the possibility of hitting anything anywhere were meant to test the waters. And the Russian response made it clear that this was a bad idea. So likely it won't happen. And we haven't seen that happen either. The Russians would have the option of hitting UK French bases in some third country outside of NATO as an intermediate step. So before launching a missile across and trying to hit London or Paris, well, are UK or French soldiers deployed, say, in X country that's not in NATO, and a potential strike there? A sort of warning. But even then, I don't think anyone wants to go there. And I don't think that people, the leaders or people in democratic countries, want or have the appetite for extended and protracted and larger war than what we have both in Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, and Russia. Now, this all comes because of these newer calls here for Ukrainian officials are trying to convince Washington to allow Kyiv to strike at Russian territory with US-supplied weapons, saying the main problem right now is the White House policy to limit our capability. We saw their military sitting in 1 or 2 kilometers from the border inside Russia, and there was nothing we could do about that. Russia, no, there is a restriction on Ukrainians to shoot at the Russian territory, and we saw all their military equipment sitting 1 or 2 kilometers from the border near Kharkiv, and there was nothing we could do. We have seen things like Vampire get fired across. We have seen incursions across, and Ukrainian domestically produced weapons. Finn said the weapons can be used as well as other nations as well, but I do get this is a massive problem. I don't know if this is going to change, as 2 unnamed US officials told Politico that the issue has not changed, that if Russian equipment sits inside Russia, then the ability to strike that is very limited. Yes, Ukraine has some systems, but it is very limited. This is where I think the F-16s, without that change in policy, are not going to have a huge effect. They will somewhere down here for an amount of time, I believe, but if they can't conduct seed and deed within Russia, it's going to be a huge problem, because these Russian missiles will be fired out of these areas, but can they then strike actually back on that? And that's something I've said the entire time. Instead of asking for more weapons, this is Zelensky pushing hard on trying to change that policy. And the closer, if Ukraine starts pushing Russia back, the closer this border, the more of an issue that's actually going to become. Like, it's more of an issue up in here than it is out here. We've got 5 or 6 kilometers of occupied territory than it is when you've got, you know, a lot further. Let's look at somewhere like here, where you're talking 150k. So you can strike a lot of the occupied, you know, logistics centers, whatever. That's all good to strike. But up in here, it's only 5 clicks behind the line. Now, many are pointing out what Antony Blinken has said. Of course, he is in Ukraine, announced a $2 billion package. That $2 billion is coming out of then the $60 billion. But he has said, we have not encouraged or enabled strikes at sort of Ukraine. And ultimately, Ukraine has to make decisions for itself about how it's going to conduct this war. A war it's conducting in defense of its freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. But people are saying, well, this is the next step to doing it. Enabled. And if you're using one of their weapon systems inside Russia, that is America enabling it. I can't see American weapons, on large at least, being used inside Russia at this point. Same as with Western troops, NATO troops coming into Ukraine. Now, of course, the future of this war, potentially anything could happen, depending how the war goes with shell issues, manpower issues, whatever. How does that become fixed, as the West has committed to this? I won't say 100%, I'll say 80%, because if it was 100% commitment, there could be far more equipment and stuff going in. But regardless, committed for the long time, and the clearance of areas like Donetsk, Crimea, how is that going to go into the future, and what needs to come in to potentially give that result? I don't know. Anyway, legends, look after yourself, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Sorry about the midway shift. Okay, see ya.